The factory bell had been muffled for the funeral, yet its iron tongue moved whenever the November wind came down from the moor, striking the inside of the bronze with a dull, unfinished sound. Each blow followed Abigail Mercer as she walked behind her husband's coffin through the gates of Calder and Vane Mill. 12 coffins stood beneath the weaving shed windows. Thomas's was the 13th, placed apart from the workers he had supposedly killed. Abigail kept her gloved hands around the leather tube that held his drawings. She was 30 years old, recently widowed, and known to most of the assembled town only as the quiet woman who copied figures neatly for her husband. None of them knew that Thomas's damaged right hand had cramped after an hour at the board, or that Abigail had drawn half the working plans carrying his signature. Her father, a maker of agricultural engines, had taught her projection, tolerances, and the honest behavior of metal under strain. After his death, Thomas had been the one man willing to say that her skill was more than an amusing accomplishment. Mr. Gideon Vane waited beside the mill steps in a black coat untouched by soot. He allowed the curate to finish, then raised a folded paper. "The inquiry has found that Mr. Mercer altered the drive assembly without authority," he said. "His recklessness caused the friction fire of the 4th instant." A murmur passed among the families. Abigail saw Mrs. Pike, whose 2 sons lay in the row, lower her eyes. Vane's partner, Edwin Calder, watched from the doorway with the grave patience of a man performing a public duty. Behind them, through a broken upper window, the blackened line shaft remained frozen above the shed. "There has been no inquiry," Abigail said. Vane did not look at her. "The company's examination is complete." "Then show them the coupling." Now he faced her. His expression was mild enough to make her interruption seem wild. "The coupling was destroyed." "Cast iron does not vanish in a fire." The mill solicitor, Horace Pell, stepped between them and held out another document. He spoke softly, as if mercy embarrassed him. Calder and Vane would offer Abigail £60 and release her from Thomas's debts if she signed a statement confirming that he had installed an unapproved device. If she refused, the company would transfer to her Thomas's remaining interest in Blackwater Ropeworks, an abandoned property outside Brackenford that carried £27 in unpaid rates and a roof judged unsafe. Abigail read both sheets. The confession described a mechanism Thomas had never installed at the mill, an automatic brake activated by excess speed. It was the machine he had been developing to prevent a main shaft from racing when a belt slipped or a governor failed. The language made his attempt to save lives sound like sabotage. "Why give me the ropeworks?" she asked. Pell glanced toward Vane. "Your husband leased it for private experiments and later purchased the freehold with money advanced by the company. Mr. Vane prefers to settle the account without distressing litigation." Abigail knew nothing of a purchase. She knew Thomas had visited Blackwater to test ropes, but he had said the place belonged to an elderly cordage maker. The deed bore Thomas's name, Pell's witness, and a date 6 months earlier. A narrow schedule at the bottom reserved to Calder and Vane a rite of passage over the eastern bridge for transporting machinery. Someone had expected the property to matter. She pushed the settlement back. "Mrs. Mercer," Pell whispered, "the rates alone will ruin you." "Then the ruin will be mine." Vane's composure tightened at the corners. "You have until noon tomorrow to reconsider. You arranged 13 coffins before you examined one broken coupling. I have considered enough." She took the deed. No cheer answered her, only the restless wind and the low, accidental bell. Yet when she turned from the steps, Mrs. Pike looked up. Their eyes met for one moment, and Abigail saw that disbelief had made its first small crack. Blackwater Ropeworks stood 3 miles east of Brackenford, where a narrow river bent beneath alder trees. The long stone walk had once housed spinning frames and tar kettles. Now half its slate roof had fallen into the upper floor. A square brick engine house leaned against the western gable, and a wooden footbridge connected the yard to the road. Nettles crowded the loading doors. Flood marks darkened the walls to the height of Abigail's knee. She arrived the next afternoon with one trunk, her father's folding rule, 2 drawing instruments, a small hammer, and 9 shillings 4pence. The carter would not take his horse over the bridge. He left her possessions beside the road and warned that no one in Brackenford would work beneath the rope-walk roof. "They say Mercer burned one factory already," he muttered. Abigail carried the trunk across herself. The dwelling rooms above the office smelled of damp plaster and mice, but the kitchen chimney drew after she removed a jackdaw's nest. She patched one window with oilcloth and slept wearing her coat. At dawn she began a measured survey, marking sound walls with chalk and unsafe floors with lengths of red twine. Survival came before vindication. One room must be made dry, one hearth usable, one door secure. The rope walk was 200 yards long, built so hemp fibers could be twisted without interruption. Most of its frames had been stripped. Near the engine house, however, a heavy testing drum remained bolted to a granite bed. A length of charred rope passed between its iron rollers. Abigail touched neither handle nor belt, yet as morning light warmed the roof, the drum turned half a revolution. She stepped back. The building was windless. Then she heard the faint descending tick of a weighted mechanism beneath the floor. The roller rims carried shallow marks, 1 notch, then 3, then 5. Thomas's calibration sequence. He had used odd numbers so Abigail could distinguish his experimental dimensions from commercial specifications. Fresh oil shone at the nearest bearing. Someone had been there within days. She followed the drive shaft toward the eastern wall. The floor plan in the office showed a coal store beyond it, but her external measurement exceeded the internal length by 11 feet. The wall's bricks were older below shoulder height and newer above. A line of 6 iron loops, apparently hooks for coiled rope, formed a descending curve that made no practical sense. At the last loop she found a smear of black grease and 1 gray wool thread. A board creaked in the office. Abigail extinguished her lamp and took up the hammer. The outer door swung once in the wind. No person appeared, but the deed she had left on the desk was no longer beneath the ink bottle. It lay open to the Eastern Passage clause. Across the river, a man in a gray coat disappeared among the alder trees. That evening rain entered through the rope-walk roof and ran along the testing shaft. Abigail set pans beneath the worst leaks, then copied the deed by lamplight. Pell's description of the eastern boundary used an old marker called Widow's Ash, though no ash tree stood on the current survey. The reserved passage ended at the former proving room. The room missing from the plan had once been legally acknowledged. At midnight, a blow struck the bridge. Abigail went outside with her lamp shielded beneath her cloak. One railing had been sawn nearly through, and the swollen river tugged at a loosened support. On the roadside lay a fresh boot print with a triangular repair in the heel. She wedged the support with fallen timber, working until her hands went numb. Whoever had entered the ropeworks had not come merely to frighten the widow. He wanted the eastern passage unusable, or he wanted her isolated while he searched. In the morning, she walked to Brackenford for nails and food. The ironmonger refused credit. A baker's boy shouted, "Fire, widow!" after her. Only Samuel Pike, a 17-year-old apprentice whose brothers had died at Calder and Vane, followed her from the square. "My mother says you asked about the coupling," he said. Harry told her the shaft screamed before the flames. He said the governor was tied. Tied with what? A tarred cord. He saw Mr. Rusk near it. Walter Rusk was Calder and Vane's maintenance foreman. Abigail remembered gray wool beneath his work coat and a boot that landed unevenly when he crossed the funeral yard. Samuel offered to repair the bridge for 1 shilling. Abigail had less than 9. She offered 6pence, meals, and lessons in mechanical drawing. He considered the bargain more seriously than charity and agreed. Together they made 1 rail safe and replaced 2 rotten deckboards with timber from a fallen shed. Abigail showed him how to test each beam with an awl rather than trust its surface. He showed her which roof slates could be bought cheaply from a demolished barn. By week's end, rain no longer reached the office, and a second-hand padlock guarded the outer door. On the 6th morning, the testing drum moved again. This time, Abigail saw why. Water from the leaking roof had collected in a narrow copper cup concealed above the shaft. When full, it descended, released a pawl, and allowed the drum to turn. Thomas had built a timed load test using the dependable weight of water. The 6 wall loops were not hooks, but positions in a linkage curve. Abigail fitted her rule between them and plotted their centers on a scrap of paper. The curve described the increasing pull of a centrifugal lever. At the lowest loop, the wall sounded hollow. Samuel fetched a cold chisel. They removed only the newest mortar, preserving each brick. Behind it stood an iron door no wider than a cupboard, its hinges mounted on the reverse side. The lock had been drilled recently, leaving bright spirals of metal in the dust. The room beyond was not a treasure chamber. It was a burnt, windowless workshop, containing a dismantled brake, a scorched drafting table, and rows of rope samples labeled by fiber, twist, moisture, and breaking load. Someone had rifled the drawers. Pages had been torn from a stitched test book. On the table lay Thomas's brass dividers, their bent left leg repaired by Abigail herself. Under them, he had scratched 4 words into the wood. "The drawing is the witness. The drawing is the witness." Abigail read the words twice. Thomas had always used drawings to settle arguments that speech confused. If he had expected danger, he would not have trusted a loose letter. He would have placed evidence in dimensions, materials, and relations that could not be altered without betraying themselves. She and Samuel carried every surviving object into the dry office. The brake consisted of 2 curved shoes designed to close around a rotating drum. One shoe was cracked. The other bore a maker's stamp from Bain's Foundry. The activating lever was missing. So were 3 pages between tests 18 and 22. Yet the labels on the rope samples formed an unbroken series, and each included a tiny diagram of the twist direction. "Could this have stopped the mill?" Samuel asked. "If it closed quickly enough without shattering the shaft." Abigail set the cracked shoe on folded sacking. "That is what Thomas was trying to prove." "Then why wasn't it there?" She had no honest answer. The confession Vane wanted claimed Thomas installed the brake without permission. The hidden workshop showed he had tested it elsewhere. Neither proved what happened on the night of the fire. For 10 days, Abigail divided her hours. In daylight, she repaired the office roof with Samuel and an elderly slater named Daniel Crowther, who accepted the iron testing frame as security for 3 pounds labor. In the evenings, she reconstructed Thomas's experiments from scorch marks, rope elongation, and the positions of the wall loops. Crowther had worked at Blackwater when it still made haulage ropes. He remembered the former owner, Mrs. Martha Bell, a cordage master's widow who had refused to sell to Calder in vain. "She said cheap rope killed men where owners never had to look," he told Abigail. "Kept records of every break in the district, then her sight went. Your Thomas came here to read the figures to her." The layered labels were in 2 hands. Thomas had written the dimensions. Martha Bell had marked each fiber with a raised knot so she could identify samples by touch. Abigail found that every 5th label included a parish initial and a date. These were not merely experiments. They documented accidents involving defective rope across 6 mills and 2 quarries. Crowther also remembered a dry culvert running from the engine house to Widow's Ash, the vanished boundary tree. Abigail located its stone mouth beneath brambles. The culvert carried no water. It had protected the engine's speaking tube and control cable from weather, allowing an operator in the proving room to release a load at the outdoor tower. Decay had exposed part of the iron conduit, explaining the mysterious ticking beneath the floor. The next Sunday, Abigail attended service in Brackenford. Conversation thinned around her. Gideon Vane occupied the front pew and afterward announced a relief fund for the bereaved families. Each payment required a declaration accepting the company's account of the fire. Mrs. Pike refused to sign. Vane approached Abigail beneath the church porch. "Your bridge is unsafe," he said pleasantly. "My company can purchase Blackwater for £40 and assume the rates." More than generosity, under the circumstances. Why purchase a ruin you gave away? To prevent another accident. Then release the family's payments without their signatures. His eyes moved to the leather tube beneath her arm. You mistake stubbornness for evidence. And you mistake possession for truth. On her walk home, Walter Rusk followed at a distance. Abigail turned unexpectedly at the bridge and saw the triangular patch beneath his heel. He stopped on the road. Mrs. Mercer, Mr. Vane sent me to inspect his right of passage. The deed reserves passage for transporting machinery, not searching rooms. You've no witness to what I do here. Samuel stepped from the engine house carrying an iron bar. Crowther appeared behind him on the roof scaffold. Rusk smiled without warmth and withdrew. That night someone threw a burning rag through the ropewalk window. It landed in wet hemp dust and smoldered instead of catching. Abigail and Samuel beat it out, but smoke blackened the newly repaired ceiling. Attached to the rag was a scrap of account paper bearing the Calder and Vane watermark. Abigail preserved it between two clean boards. She reported the attempt to Constable Hewitt, who said boys often played dangerous tricks. When she named Rusk, he asked whether grief had disturbed her judgment. She left without surrendering the evidence. The attack changed her priorities. Repairing the entire ropewalk was impossible, but fireproofing the workshop and securing its records were not. Crowther helped build a brick-lined cupboard in the office. Mrs. Pike began sending Stu, then came herself to copy the rope labels because Abigail could not investigate, earn money, and stand watch at once. Samuel's lessons attracted two younger apprentices. Abigail charged each a penny and used the money for lamp oil. By December, the office had become a modest evening school in drawing and safe machinery. The town still distrusted her, but workers came after dark with questions they dared not ask at their mills. One brought a broken governor pin from Calder and Vane. Another described Vane ordering heavier looms connected to the old main shaft before Christmas contracts were complete. Abigail found the first decisive clue not in Thomas's surviving book, but in the labels Martha Bell had knotted. The twist diagrams appeared random until Abigail overlaid them in date order. Left-laid and right-laid ropes alternated like the directional strokes used in sectional drawings. The raised knots indicated distances. Together, they described a longitudinal cut through the hidden break. Thomas had distributed his final plan across 32 samples, so no stolen page could erase it. The reconstruction revealed a narrow, fusible collar, intended to release the brake when heat or excess speed strained the governor. Its alloy required more tin than ordinary bronze. Abigail found metal droplets beneath the testing drum and wrapped them carefully. If a matching collar had been fitted at Calder and Vane, some fragment should have survived the fire. She petitioned the coroner to preserve the mill debris. Horace Pell answered that the damaged machinery had already been sold as scrap to Bain's foundry. Sold by whose authority? She demanded in his office. Pell rubbed his forehead. He was not a brave man, but neither was he comfortable with forged certainty. The company held title to its machinery. The inquest has not opened. You allowed evidence to be melted. I allowed nothing. His gaze fell toward a locked drawer. Mr. Calder arranged the sale. Edwin Calder, not Vane. Abigail had mistaken the shape of the partnership. Vane supplied money and public force. Calder controlled drawings, stores, and repairs. Thomas had trusted Calder enough to show him early designs. Pell would say no more, but as Abigail left, he remarked that Baines recorded every received load by weight. She understood the gift disguised as trivia. At the foundry, the clerk refused access until Crowther presented an old delivery ticket, proving that one brake shoe from Blackwater had been cast there. The foundry master compared Abigail's cracked shoe with his pattern book. The alloy order matched a private commission placed by Thomas. More importantly, Calder and Vane's fire scrap weighed 200 weight less upon arrival than it had on Calder's dispatch note. Someone removed parts between mill and foundry, Abigail said. The master shrugged. Or lied about the first weight. He permitted her to examine unmelted pieces. Among warped pulleys, she found a governor spindle with tarred cord fused into its fork. The cord had held the governor arms closed. At high speed, they could not spread to regulate the engine. Samuel's brother had told the truth. But the spindle alone did not name the person who tied it. Abigail needed the missing coupling, the installation order, or a witness willing to oppose the richest men in Brackenford. When she returned to Blackwater, the iron door stood open. The fireproof cupboard had been forced. Martha's accident labels were gone. Samuel lay beside the desk with blood in his hair. He woke before the doctor arrived and insisted that he had slipped, but Abigail saw bruises shaped like fingers on his arm. His fear was not for himself. "Rusk took the samples," he whispered when they were alone. "He said Mother would lose the relief money and our cottage if I named him. He found the culvert plan, too." Abigail's anger rose hot enough to blur the room. She had brought a boy into danger because she needed hands and wanted an ally. Competence had become pride, and pride had made her underestimate men who could purchase silence as easily as coal. "You will not keep watch here again," she said. "Then they win." "No. Then I pay the proper cost of continuing." She sold Thomas's silver watch for £5. With it, she hired Crowther for nights, paid Samuel's doctor, and moved Mrs. Pike's copied label record to the chapel vestry under the curate's seal. The original samples were lost, but the copied sequence preserved the drawing. Abigail had insisted on duplication because her father taught that a plan existing in one place was an accident waiting to happen. 3 days later, a court notice arrived. Calder and Vane claimed Thomas's deed was security for a company loan, not an outright transfer, and sought possession of Blackwater for default. Pell's signature supported the claim. Abigail had 14 days to answer and less than 2 shillings remaining. She read the deed until dawn. The Eastern Passage Clause referred to machinery transported for the common proving benefit described in the annexed covenant. No covenant was attached. Its absence could make the clause meaningless, or prove that pages had been removed after execution. The stitching holes along the deed's fold showed 2 sheets had once been sewn there. The drawing was the witness, Thomas had written. Perhaps he had meant more than the machine. Abigail laid the deed over a rubbing of the iron door. The spacing of its 6 rivets matched 6 punctures in the parchment. Thomas had used the deed itself as a template when positioning the linkage loops. The missing covenant and the break drawing had been made to authenticate one another. At the bottom of Martha Bell's copied knot sequence, a set of measurements extended beyond the break. They described a second location, 12 feet east, 4 feet below the old ash marker. The vanished tree had not concealed a room, it had marked a boundary deposit. The vanished tree had not concealed a room, it had marked a boundary deposit. Widow's ash had stood beyond the eastern bridge where the road embankment sloped to the river. Crowther remembered lightning splitting it 9 years earlier. The stump had been dug out when Calder and Vane widened the cart track, leaving a shallow hollow now filled with stones. Abigail did not dig at night. If she found legal papers alone, Vane could accuse her of planting them. She asked the curate, the constable, Pell, and Martha Bell's former housemaid to witness the search. Constable Hewitt refused until Mrs. Pike told him, within hearing of the market crowd, that a man unwilling to watch an honest excavation ought not wear the parish badge. He arrived the next morning looking injured by public duty. At 4 feet, Samuel's spade struck slate. Beneath 2 overlapping slabs lay a glazed earthenware pipe sealed at both ends with pitch. The constable opened it. Inside were rolled parchments, a small brass pattern, and a letter wrapped in waxed cloth. The first parchment was the missing covenant. Martha Bell had conveyed Blackwater to Thomas for £1 and his promise to preserve her testing archive for the benefit of working people. Calder and Vane had no mortgage. Their advance had purchased only the right to use the proving machinery at stated fees. The second document assigned jointly to Martha and Thomas any patent arising from their automatic brake, with Martha's eventual share held in trust for injured mill workers and their families. Pell's face turned the color of old paper. His signature appeared beneath both documents, witnessed by his clerk. "You knew," Abigail said. "I witnessed them," he replied. "Mr. Calder later told me Mrs. Bell destroyed the counterparts and Thomas abandoned the work. When I prepared the deed transfer after the fire, the covenant was no longer attached." "Who detached it?" He looked toward the constable, then at the sealed tube. "The deed was kept in Calder's strong room." Martha's letter explained why the archive had been hidden. She had collected evidence that several manufacturers knowingly bought underspecified ropes and disabled governors to meet production quotas. She feared seizure under claims of commercial theft. The pipe was to be opened if the proving room was attacked or if Thomas died before registering the patent. The brass pattern was the missing fusible collar, stamped with a serial number and a minute raised line. Abigail recognized the line as a deliberate weakness, calculated to part at a safe load. The find secured Blackwater, but it did not prove who caused the fire. Calder could argue that Thomas tied the governor while attempting an unauthorized test. Vane could claim ignorance. The worker trust had no money unless the break became practical. Abigail decided to complete the machine. She could not simply copy Thomas. His cracked brake shoe showed that the first design closed too violently. Her reconstruction revealed the same flaw. At mill speed, the shoes might stop the drum but break the shaft, sending iron through the room. Thomas's missing pages likely recorded this failure. For 6 weeks, Abigail worked in the proving room while winter froze the river edges. She earned food by drawing repair parts for farmers and teaching apprentices at night. Crowther stabilized 12 yards of roof, not the whole ruin. Mrs. Pike organized small subscriptions from bereaved families. Each payment entered publicly. The foundry extended credit only after taking a lien on the finished brake pattern. No miraculous fortune repaired Blackwater. Every dry corner cost labor, slate, lime, and an argument with cold. Abigail changed the brake from a sudden lock to a graduated grip. Martha's rope data showed that a woven hemp lining compressed predictably when dry, but swelled in damp air. She substituted laminated leather protected by a tin shield and shaped the lever so force increased in stages. Samuel, recovered but still troubled by headaches, drew the revised linkage under her supervision. "Mr. Mercer's line is straighter," he said one night. "Thomas drew beautifully," Abigail answered. "But a beautiful line can still describe a bad machine." The words hurt, then freed her. Love did not require pretending Thomas had finished what death interrupted. Her task was not to turn him into a faultless martyr. It was to continue the honest work they had shared. They tested first with sandbags, then an unloaded drum, then a weighted rope carriage. The brake slowed each load without shock. On the 7th test, a retaining bolt sheared and the lever struck Abigail's shoulder, throwing her against the wall. Pain took her breath. The failure came from an old bolt she had reused to save threepence. She wore a sling for 10 days and wrote the error into the test book in ink that could not be scraped away. Her students saw the entry. Safety, she told them, depended less on never failing than on refusing to hide failure. Meanwhile, Calder and Vane accelerated the mill. Christmas orders had become January penalties. Workers reported hot bearings, patched belts, and Rusk inspecting the governor before every shift. Vane published a notice calling Abigail's school an unlawful gathering and her break a widow's dangerous imitation. Then Edwin Calder came to Blackwater, alone. He appeared older away from Vane, with ash-colored whiskers and a tremor in his left hand. Abigail received him in the office with Crowther present. "Gideon intends to demonstrate full production before the shareholders next Monday," Calder said. "The main shaft will run 12% above its rated speed." "Why tell me?" "Because your brake might work. You removed it before the fire," his silence answered. Thomas had delivered a prototype collar and lever to the mill on the 3rd of November. Calder authorized installation for a night test, then panicked when Vane learned production would stop for 2 hours. He ordered Rusk to remove the brake before morning. Rusk detached the lever but left the new governor collar. To recover lost output, Vane later ordered the governor tied closed. The shaft raced, the bearing overheated, and oil-soaked lint ignited. Thomas entered the shed trying to reach the stop valve and died there. "You let them call him an arsonist," Abigail said. Vane threatened prosecution for unauthorized alteration. He said the company would collapse and hundreds would lose work. 12 lost their lives. Thomas lost his name. You preserved wages by teaching every owner that a worker's death can be entered as a saving. Calder placed 3 torn test pages on the desk. They recorded the cracked shoe and Thomas's revised calculation for gradual breaking. Calder had stolen them from Blackwater before the funeral. He also produced the mill's installation order, signed by himself and countersigned by Vane. "Give evidence at the inquest," Abigail said. "Vane will ruin me." "That is not evidence. That is a price." She would not promise him forgiveness. She did promise that his documents would be copied and that his exact conduct, neither enlarged nor softened, would be stated. Calder left without deciding. The following night, flames rose from the eastern end of the rope walk. Rusk had entered through the culvert and poured lamp oil along the dry timber near the hidden room. Crowther's watchfulness brought the alarm early, but wind drove fire beneath the roof slates. Abigail formed a bucket line with Samuel, Mrs. Pike, the apprentices, and neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid her. They saved the office and proving room by pulling down a connecting section of rotten roof. 40 yards of rope walk burned. Abigail saw Rusk fleeing across the bridge. Samuel moved to follow, but she stopped him. Catching a man mattered less than keeping Crowther from the smoke and preventing sparks from reaching the stored tar. At dawn, Constable Hewitt found Rusk's iron pry bar inside the culvert, his initials stamped near the grip. More damaging was the oil can he had dropped, bearing Calder and Vane's stores number. Rusk disappeared before arrest. Vane issued a statement that company property had been stolen to stage an attack. Blackwater looked more worthless than ever. Snow fell through the charred ribs. Abigail's repaired roof was scarred, her classroom soaked, and the patterns pledged to the foundry. For several hours she believed the fire had reduced every sacrifice to smoke. Then Mrs. Pike arrived with 6 women carrying brooms, food, and dry blankets. Foundry workers brought corrugated iron sheets rejected from a warehouse order. The curate offered the parish room for lessons. Even the ironmonger who had refused credit sent nails, though he included a bill. They had not come because Abigail was suddenly rich. They had watched her protect a wounded boy, record her own failure, and choose people over pursuit. The Ropeworks had become evidence of a different way to work. The inquest opened on Monday morning, the same hour Vane planned his production demonstration. Abigail carried certified copies of the covenant, the reconstructed drawing, the governor's spindle, the fire scrap weights, the installation order, and the torn test pages to the town hall. Pell testified that the deed annex had been removed from Calder's strong room. Baines's master explained the missing scrap weight. Samuel described his brother's last account and Rusk's assault, supported by the doctor's record. Constable Hewitt produced the pry bar and oil can. Vane's barrister attacked each piece separately. A cord could be tied by any hand. A weight might be mistaken. A widow could redraw her husband's machine. A frightened apprentice could imagine an attacker. The strategy nearly worked because doubt, divided into small portions, resembled reason. Abigail asked permission to demonstrate the relationship among the evidence. On a table, she assembled the brass pattern from the boundary pipe, the surviving governor's spindle, and a paper overlay derived from Martha's rope labels. The pattern's serial mark matched a reversed impression in the spindle's fused metal. Thomas's drawing specified a retaining pin of 5/16 of an inch. The mill's installation order listed that same uncommon dimension. The torn test pages continued exactly from the equations encoded in the samples. The dispatch discrepancy equaled, within 7 pounds, the recorded weight of the removed brake assembly. Not one item stood alone. Together they described a machine installed with authorization, partly removed, then concealed. "The drawing is a witness," Abigail said, "because every honest dimension must agree with every other. A lie may alter one paper. It cannot make wrong metal, missing weight, hidden orders, and a broken governor agree by accident." The hall doors opened. Edwin Calder entered. He swore that Vane had ordered the governor tied and that he himself had ordered Thomas's brake removed. He named Rusk as the man who carried out both instructions. His confession did not rescue him from consequence. It placed him inside the fraud. Before the coroner could adjourn, a messenger arrived from the mill. The main shaft had begun to shriek during the shareholders' demonstration. Workers had shut the steam valve, but the overloaded flywheel continued driving the line. A bearing was smoking. Several women were trapped behind jammed fire doors. Vane demanded that the hearing ignore the interruption. The coroner did not. Abigail looked at the completed brake model beside her evidence. It had passed weighted tests, not a full mill trial. Installing it during a failure could kill the men who approached the shaft. Samuel said, "You know its limits." That was precisely why she went. At Calder and Vane, smoke rolled along the weaving shed ceiling. The engine had stopped taking steam, but stored momentum kept the shaft turning. One bearing glowed dark red. A loosened pulley had twisted the exit door linkage, trapping workers at the eastern wall. Water thrown on the bearing would crack the iron and scatter fragments. Abigail refused Vane's order to enter at once. She made the foreman clear everyone from the pulley line and build a shield of wet wool bales. The Blackwater brake could not fit the shaft without its mounting frame, but its principle could be applied to the mill's rope drum. She directed Samuel and 2 foundrymen to wrap the drum with layers of wet leather, then attach the graduated lever through the maintenance slot. Crowther measured the anchor bolts. One was too weak. They moved the fulcrum to a stone pier, losing mechanical advantage but avoiding the failure that had injured Abigail. The alteration cost 9 minutes. Vane shouted that every second endangered lives. Abigail did not answer. Haste without calculation had brought them there. When the lever closed, the leather lining smoked. The drum slowed unevenly, pulling hard against its rope. Abigail called each stage by the chalk marks on her revised curve. The foundryman advanced the screw. The shaft's scream fell to a groan, then separate knocks, then silence. Workers broke the jammed door from the safe side. 34 women and children crossed the yard. 2 had fainted from smoke, but none died. In the quiet afterward, a section of bearing housing split and dropped to the floor. Inside its oil channel lay the remains of the tied governor cord. Before witnesses from the inquest, Constable Hewitt removed it. The knot was a rigger's constrictor used at the ropeworks, and its free end carried blue tracer yarn issued only to Calder and Vane's maintenance department. Rusk had not merely disabled the governor once. He had repeated the act for Vane's demonstration while the inquest sat across town. He was arrested that evening at the railway station. Faced with the store's records, the arson tools, Samuel's injuries, and Calder's testimony, he admitted tying the governor on Vane's instructions. He had removed the brake parts after the first fire, stolen Martha's samples, and burned Blackwater to destroy the copied evidence he did not know had been stored elsewhere. The coroner's jury found that the 12 workers and Thomas Mercer died because Calder and Vane knowingly operated an unsafe shaft and concealed an authorized safety experiment. Thomas's name was cleared of negligence and arson. The finding did not restore him to Abigail, nor did it turn the bereaved family's winter into triumph. Justice arrived, as a record corrected, lies made costly, and future denial made harder. Gideon Vane was charged with conspiracy, destruction of evidence, and offenses connected to both fires. His creditors forced him from the partnership before trial. Edwin Calder pleaded guilty to falsifying company records and surrendered his interest in the mill as part of a settlement. Abigail did not speak for leniency. His eventual testimony had mattered, but it did not erase the days in which silence protected him and endangered others. The court upheld Martha's covenant and Thomas's ownership of Blackwater. Because Abigail inherited from Thomas under his valid will, the property remained hers, subject to the Worker Benefit Trust. Calder and Vane's attempted mortgage claim failed. Pell was censured for allowing the detached deed to be used, though his cooperation prevented a harsher penalty. He later served without fee when the trust was formally registered, a practical restitution Abigail accepted without calling it friendship. The automatic brake received a provisional patent in the joint names established by the covenant, Martha Bell and Thomas Mercer, with Abigail listed for the graduated mechanism and improved lining. Martha had died the previous spring, so her share passed directly to the trust. Abigail refused an industrialist's offer to buy the patent outright. Instead, manufacturers paid modest license fees tied to the number of machines installed. Plans were supplied at reduced cost to small mills that opened their maintenance books to inspection. Before any license could be issued, however, the patent examiner required a full-scale proving trial, observed by independent engineers. Vane's barrister protested that Abigail had merely adapted common friction blocks, and that a woman who had never held formal employment as an engineer could not claim invention. The objection delayed registration for 3 months and deprived the trust of expected winter income. Abigail answered with work rather than outrage. She arranged the trial at Bain's foundry, where the brake would stop a flywheel loaded to the equivalent of 100 working looms. The foundry master selected the materials. An engineer from Leeds chose the test speeds without telling Abigail beforehand. Pell brought the sealed covenant, and the curate brought Martha's earliest sample book, discovered after the inquest among parish deposits made during her failing eyesight. The first run succeeded. On the second, the leather lining glazed under heat, and stopping distance increased by nearly 12 feet. The observers murmured. Samuel looked stricken, but Abigail ordered the result entered before anyone adjusted the brake. She cooled the drum, examined the polished surface, and saw that the tin shield trapped vapor from the wet leather. Thomas's original vent holes had been omitted from her revised casing because she thought them intended only to lighten the casting. She had misread his purpose. The admission cost her the day's trial fee and another week at the drafting board. It also solved the defect. Abigail restored the vents, changed their angle to prevent lint entry, and added a replaceable grooved lining that released heat without weakening the grip. On the repeated trial, the brake stopped the wheel 6 times within the allowable distance. The Leeds engineer signed the record because the failed run remained beside the successful ones. "You could have begun again and called it the first test," he remarked. Then the next owner might hide his first failure too. That exchange appeared in the examiner's report. It did more for confidence in the device than any perfect demonstration could have done. The trust still faced an immediate shortage. Abigail calculated that rebuilding the burned rope walk would consume 4 years of likely fees. Making brake assemblies required less space and brought quicker income, but abandoning rope manufacture would betray Martha's purpose. Mrs. Pike proposed a compromise. Restore only enough walk to produce short governor cords and safety lines whose quality could be demonstrated on site. Longer haulage ropes could wait until orders paid for a covered extension. They presented the budget at a public meeting in the parish room. Every figure was chalked on a board. £8 for roof timber, £3.12 for lime and slate, £5 for a used lathe, weekly wages, fuel, rates, and a reserve for injuries. Workers who had known only deductions on their payslips saw, for the first time, how a workshop's choices might be explained rather than imposed. They approved the smaller restoration by 21 votes to 4. One dissenting man accused Abigail of using the dead to build a business bearing her name. She did not silence him. She showed that the patent shares belonged to Martha, Thomas, and herself, while the property covenant directed a fixed portion of income to the trust. Her own wage was listed with everyone else's and could be changed only by the trustees. "You may still distrust me," she told him, "but you need not guess what I take." He voted against her again the next year, though he sent his daughter to the drawing class. Abigail counted that as a more honest change than applause. During the first year, the fees were small. they repaired no vast estate. Blackwater's western roof remained covered in temporary iron through the spring, and the burned 40 yards were demolished to a safe wall rather than rebuilt. Abigail concentrated on the office, proving room, engine house, and one 60-yard stretch of rope walk. Crowther supervised the masonry. Samuel completed his apprenticeship at Bain's foundry while attending evening drawing lessons. The trust's first payments went to medical bills and rent for the 12 bereaved families. Mrs. Pike insisted that assistance be recorded as a right under the covenant, not a gift from grateful widows. She became one of 3 elected trustees. A skeptical shopkeeper served as another and questioned every expenditure, which Abigail found irritating and useful. By the following autumn, Blackwater employed 8 people. 4 made tested safety ropes using Martha's preserved specifications. 2 assembled brake kits. 1 clerk maintained accident reports sent anonymously by workers across the district. Abigail directed the proving room and taught mechanical drawing 3 evenings a week. Every failed test remained in the book beside the successful ones. The physical archive grew from Martha's original rope data into a practical library of wear, heat, load, and maintenance. It had material value because it supported licensed machines and safe rope production. It had legal value because each test was witnessed and traceable. More importantly, it preserved the knowledge of workers whose warnings had once disappeared into owners' desks. Not all of Brackenford changed its mind. Some said Abigail had prospered by ruining the town's largest employer. Others disliked women entering the drawing school or workers reading machinery plans. Yet mill families continued coming across the repaired bridge. Opinion shifted not as a single grateful crowd but person by person, after a brake stopped a loom shaft, a rope passed its honest load, or a student found a dangerous crack before a foreman could paint over it. Calder and Vane reopened under worker and creditor oversight with fewer looms and enforced maintenance stops. The reduction caused hardship for a season, but no owner could again claim that uninterrupted speed was the same as prosperity. Inspection doors were altered to open outward. Governors were sealed with numbered wire. The automatic brakes were fitted first to the main shaft and then to each weaving room. Abigail returned to the mill on the first anniversary of the fire. 13 brass plaques had been fixed in the entrance hall, Thomas's among the workers rather than apart. The company had asked her to design a grand memorial mechanism. She declined and suggested spending the money on 2 additional exits. The plaques were enough. Mrs. Pike stood beside the names of her sons. "I thought you defended Thomas because he was yours," she said. "At first, perhaps I did. Then you defended all of them." Abigail touched the repaired leather tube containing the original drawings. They were always part of the same machine. On a pale morning in March 1880, the first complete production brake left Blackwater Ropeworks. Snowmelt moved beneath the bridge, but the strengthened piers held. Samuel drove the cart while apprentices walked beside it, arguing over who had achieved the finer finish on the lever housing. Abigail watched from the doorway of the proving room. Her right shoulder still ached in wet weather. Thomas's silver watch was gone and could not be recovered. She had chosen Samuel's care over a keepsake and did not regret the price. On the drafting table lay Thomas's bent dividers beside her father's folding rule. Neither object was treated as a relic. Both were used. She opened the new test book. Its first pages contained copies of the hidden drawing, Martha's covenant, and the coroner's finding. After them came columns for every load, defect, alteration, and witness. At the head of each page, Abigail had printed a simple instruction: record what fails. Outside, workers began stretching fresh hemp down the surviving length of the rope walk. The fibers caught the morning light in hundreds of fine lines. Once twisted, each separate strand would disappear into the rope, but its strength would remain measurable in the whole. Abigail pulled the testing lever. The drum gathered speed. At the marked limit, the governor spread, the collar released, and the curved shoes closed by degrees. The machine slowed with a deep, controlled hum until the last rotation settled beneath her hand. For a moment, the old building was quiet, not abandoned quiet, nor the hush imposed after a lie, but the attentive silence of people waiting to record an honest result. Abigail dipped her pen and wrote it down.